After searching high and low, it is very clear to me nobody has been able to pinpoint the exact moment in time Sir Keir Starmer made these dramatic shifts, from being labelled the candidate to continue Corbynism to the bog standard pro-establishment neoliberal, from the proud trade unionist to banning shadow cabinet members from joining the picket line, from the human rights lawyer to labelling anybody helping a refugee cross the channel a terrorist. Some have argued that his principles haven't changed and he has always been this way, going as far as saying that he has less morals than Boris Johnson and even more lies. However, I will try to be more charitable than that. Over the next 3 videos, I will attempt to produce an observation of the political beliefs of Sir Keir Starmer before and after becoming leader of the Labour Party. Full disclosure, this will be from the hypothesis that Sir Keir Starmer used the policies of Jeremy Corbyn to become the democratically elected leader of the Labour Party and always planned to carry on the legacy of Tony Blair and by extension Margaret Thatcher. These videos were heavily inspired by the fantastic conversation between rapper Loki and journalist Matt Kennard. Please check out their full conversation, link in the description below. Anyway, there's no better place to start than at the beginning. Sir Keir Starmer was born in 1962 in London and raised in leafy Surrey. Blah blah blah, he went to grammar school, something, University of Leeds, blah blah blah, University of Oxford. I guess it's worth mentioning while at Oxford, Sir Keir Starmer actually edited the radical magazine Socialist Alternatives. But to me it sounds like something someone would do if they wanted to start kissing women outside of their immediate family. But it's very important to mention right now that he did go on to become a barrister, specialising in human rights matters.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of death row work, cases from the Caribbean, and we've established some really important principles there about not sentencing everybody to death. I also got made a Queen's Counsel, which is odd since I often used to propose the abolition of the monarchy.
I would say it's more odd that in 2008 he became Director of Public Prosecutions and Head of the Crown Prosecution Service, holding these offices until 2013. I don't know, call me a bleeding heart leftist, but there's just something odd about someone being the top cop in the country for 5 years, especially when you actually look at his record in office and anyone with an ounce of how much injustice there is in our criminal justice system. And this very much includes the decision not to charge the killers of John Charles de Menez. But none of that even matters because he was such a nice guy to work with. And if you don't believe me, there's someone on the Labour Twitter channel that will tell you different.
First thing I would say about Keir is he was a great leader. He brought the best out of everybody that he worked with.
As DPP, I head up the Crown Prosecution Service, and essentially that means I take the lead on all legal issues and carry ultimate responsibility for our policy and ultimate responsibility for all of the decisions that are made in all the hundreds of thousands of cases day in, day out by the CPS.
And to be honest, that sounds really cool. An actual head of an organisation taking responsibility for the acts and whims of that organisation. But what you will slowly start to realise throughout these 3 videos is that Sir Keir Starmer will tend to change his mind or opinion on things he's said in the past. And if he's not able to verbalise it, he will send out someone from his shadow cabinet to do it on his behalf.
To say he wasn't DPP when charges were brought in the first place. But obviously there has been a huge miscarriage of justice in this case, and I'm sure that will be looked at. But Keir has been clear that it wasn't something that ever came across his desk.
This is another thing that I've just found ridiculous, is the way that they've concocted this argument that the head of the CPS is not responsible for things that happen at the CPS while he's the head of it.
And carry ultimate responsibility for our policy and ultimate responsibility for all of the decisions that are made in all the hundreds of thousands of cases day in, day out by the CPS.
And this is not me taking an opportunity to nitpick or do some type of gotcha. It's a genuine question asking, was Keir telling the truth back then, or are his strongest defenders telling the truth right now? Because both cannot be the case. And this all boils down to the fact as to whether Sir Keir Starmer is trustworthy. It's not a case of whether his politics have changed over time. This is everything to do with his character as a human being. But whatever I think of Keir Starmer, there's one thing you can't take away from the boy, is that he knows how to network.
2 months before he made that statement, he had attended a networking session for ministers at the Foreign Office. Which ministry oversees MI6? The Foreign Office. Yeah. So, and again, I went through the records to see if any other DPP had attended a networking session of ministers at the Foreign Office, and none had.
And I would also be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that Sir Keir Starmer also attended the sleazy politicians and the kiss-ass journalists annual extravaganza in the shape of the Rupert Murdoch summer party in 2009 and 2023. I guess Keir can be proud of the fact that he pretended to step back from courting the Murdoch press in 2011 when it was revealed that they did a copious amount of phone hacking. Once the 5-year term at the Crown Prosecution Service had come to an end for Keir Starmer, he was then knighted in 2014. And it seems the guy couldn't stop winning when he decided to stand as a Labour candidate in the 2015 general election. I suppose when he was quoted as saying, "I hate losing," he neglected to mention the fact that he would probably do anything, and I mean absolutely anything, to win. We have plenty of time to talk about that. Let's just slow cook this for a moment. Once elected as an MP in 2015, he immediately moonwalked into Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet, where he initially took on the role of immigration minister and then went on to be the secretary for exiting the European Union. After 4 years as party leader and 2 elections, Jeremy Corbyn decided to step down, which paved the way for another Labour leadership election.
Sir Keir has 68, Jess Phillips 22, Clive Lewis only 4, Emily Thornberry just 10, Lisa Nandy 24 and Maslong Bailey 26.
With 2020 hindsight, it's hard to imagine Keir Starmer ever losing that particular leadership race with that many MPs backing him. However, with a man that has already admitted he hates losing, I'm guessing the only way he could see himself winning over the membership was to be a Corbyn continuation candidate. Or I could be completely wrong and he did believe all those things back then and has completely changed his mind today. On a side note, we also have to talk about the fact that in the last leadership race, there was 4 women candidates and still they weren't able to elect one. But let's not get too sidetracked. Throughout the leadership race and beyond, Keir Starmer did nothing but praise Jeremy Corbyn, which he has since retracted and denied him like he was Jesus or something.
All ready, guys? Yep.
Sometimes I look at this old footage and feel like I'm tripping on acid. How could you have been in Jeremy Corbyn's actual shadow cabinet and today you're banning him from even being able to run as a Labour candidate? I just can't get my head around it. So it goes without saying that Keir Starmer comfortably won the Labour leadership election. But it seems that those that truly knew him at the time kind of questioned the way he went about it.
And I thought, Tony never did that. Tony was completely straight, completely honest. It's a different way of doing your politics. So is Keir lying to get the job, and will he then change? That's what this person was saying to me, as a way of promoting Keir.
If even people that align with you politically are questioning your methods and motives, then yeah, I don't think this is going to end well for any of us. So I don't think it's outlandish to surmise Keir has had the quickest rise to become the Labour leader out of everybody in the last 40 years. Tony Blair, aka Mr. Smiley Stupid Face, aka the Middle East Angel of Death, spent 4 years as an MP before he was invited into the shadow cabinet. It took Gordon Brown 11 years to dislodge Tony Blair like a tick from a dog's back before he got a crack at being Labour leader and by proxy, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Gordon Brown had the pleasure of saving capitalism from itself by bailing out the banks. And all anyone ever remembers about Gordon Brown is that he apparently bankrupted a country that can print its own money, and calling that woman a bigot, even though she was acting like a bigot. Edward Miliband, who would come last in a contest asking who is the more popular Miliband, was made Labour leader, and he wanted to show everyone that he was tough enough.
Hell yes, I'm tough enough.
That he could eat food like any other human being, and that he consented to do an interview in the sex dungeon of a known and admitted sex addict. Jeremy Corbyn spent a generation in the backbenches before he was made Labour leader. But I'm going to speak a lot more about him a bit later. And that brings us right up to date with today's leader, Sir Keir Starmer, who has this habit of telling us where he comes from as opposed to what policies he will bring in once in government. For some reason, I know more about what his parents did than I do my own grandparents, and it was all against my will.
My dad was a toolmaker. My dad was a toolmaker. He was skilled as a toolmaker, highly skilled.
And your dad, I think it's right to say, was a toolmaker?
He was a toolmaker, yeah. Dad was a toolmaker. My dad was a toolmaker. And he was a toolmaker. He was a skilled man. And it's hard work, it's skilled work.
My dad, he was a toolmaker.
My dad was a toolmaker. My dad was a toolmaker. She was a nurse in the NHS. My mum was a nurse. My mum was a nurse in the NHS. My sister was a nurse in the NHS. My sister was a nurse, and my mum was a nurse. My mum worked in the NHS. My sister worked in the NHS. Mum was a nurse, and a very proud nurse. She loved nursing.
And your mum was a nurse?
Yes, she was. And my mum was a nurse. Mum was a nurse. You'll have heard this before, Nick. My mum was a nurse, my sister was a nurse, my mum was a nurse, and my mum was a nurse.
And in case you weren't listening, his mum was a nurse, his dad was a toolmaker, and he lived in a Pebble Dash house. And if that's what his parents did as a profession, that's fine. Kudos to them. But what is the purpose of him telling this story over and over and over again? Especially when these stories are not accompanied with policies that help the working class. It just seems that Keir's trying to paint himself as having more humble beginnings than Oliver Twist.
I love this country, but at the moment things are heading in the wrong direction. When I was growing up, we didn't have much. Dad was a toolmaker, Mum was a nurse, and when Mum was ill, things were tough. I remember what it's like not to be sure you can pay your bills. I remember when our phone was cut off. So when I hear about people worrying, I know exactly what they're going through. That's why I'll always be on the side of working people. The next Labour government will deliver for you and your family. I grew up in a Pebble Dash semi. My dad was a toolmaker and worked in a factory all his life. And my mum was a nurse, and a very proud nurse with it. And that's why it's important for me to reflect on my own experiences in life, to know what it's like to be reliant on the NHS, to know what it's like on occasion not to be able to pay the bills as happened when I was growing up, to understand that anxiety, but then to do more than just understand.
I just love how that video cuts off before he can explain what the next step is after understanding. Could it be policies maybe? I get this sense that Keir just believes that the working class people just need someone to be empathetic and sympathetic, and that will be enough for them to get through the day. You can just forget about policies and support from your government. It just feels really dishonest when you decide to cut a video and put it out on your own Labour channel and you don't get to finish the point you were trying to make. But there is one thing you can say about Sir Keir Starmer. He knows how to stay on point wherever he goes, even if that point makes no sense and just feels so out of place.
I grew up working class in the 1970s. I know what a cost of living crisis feels like. The anxiety and, yes, the shame of not being able to pay bills that only months ago were affordable. Our phone was cut off like this. And by the way, that was it. There were no mobiles back then. We got through it.
And there you have it. Maybe that's all it is. We got through it, so you will too. So maybe I don't even need to give you any policies. But I won't delve too much into his policies right now. That'll be saved for another video. But just sticking to the topic of Sir Keir coming from really poor and humble beginnings, even he acknowledges that he wouldn't have been able to go to university today if he was leaving school. Beginning so humble, he doesn't realise when he has in fact become a millionaire.
You live in a property worth over £1 million. How much do you earn?
I live in North London in a house which didn't cost £1 million, and I'm paying off the mortgage like
it's worth over £1 million.
But maybe as a former human rights lawyer, Keir Starmer doesn't understand that assets are included into your wealth. Maybe Keir Starmer genuinely believes that Elon Musk has over $200 billion physically around his mansion. But what do I know? It's so hard to understand what is going through Keir Starmer's mind at times. But what I do know, he will employ the plight of the working class when he needs it to get his own way. Like the time he wanted to gain access to a pub which was co-owned by anti-lockdown enthusiasts.
They've been on the front line keeping people alive. So I really don't need lectures from you about this pandemic.
And I imagine this particular mic drop situation didn't turn out how Sir Keir Starmer wanted it to. Things got physical pretty quickly, and Keir ended up leaving with his tail between his legs, like an episode of Jeremy Corbyn where he was in fact the father. As previously mentioned, it does feel like that Sir Keir Starmer basically did a speed run to become the Labour leader. And this is in no small part to him courting Jeremy Corbyn supporters within the Labour membership. A Daily Mail article has quotes such as, "I am a socialist," and he promised a very forward-looking radicalism. These quotes are backed up by his actions displayed during the leadership debates.
I'm asking you to raise your hands. When you go into the next election, would you have any of these in your manifesto potentially? First of all, raise your hands if you're into scrapping tuition fees. That's everyone. Renationalising water and electricity. Yeah. Abolishing private schools. Nobody. Keeping the pension age at 66. Nobody. And a 4-day week. No.
In all honesty, I believe that Jeremy Corbyn would have raised his hands for all 5 of those questions. But it seems everyone was on the same page at the time, raising their hands to 2 of them. And something tells me, with the exception of Rebecca Long-Bailey, everybody at that debate probably wouldn't even raise their hands to the 2 they did. Some could argue that Emily Thornberry was drinking the Jeremy Corbyn Kool-Aid, but it goes without saying that Rebecca Long-Bailey was definitely one of his strongest disciples. And yet, it seemed the only reason Sir Keir Starmer got elected instead of Rebecca Long-Bailey could be something to do with gender. There definitely needs to be a deeper analysis as to why the Labour membership cannot seem to be able to elect a woman leader. But I guess I will save that for another video.
We are not going to trash the last Labour government. But nor are we going to trash the last 4 years. There have been very many important moves. Jeremy Corbyn made our party the party of anti-austerity, and he was right to do so.
This attempt to paint himself as someone that respects everyone that comes before him resulted in these 10 pledges. Each pledge more radical than the last. It's quite easy to see now why the Corbyn supporters within the Labour membership were so excited by this Haribo character.
If you get elected on a platform which is effectively Corbynism, a more presentable version of Corbynism, I can get you elected.
Fast forward to today, and these 10 pledges have been replaced by 5 national missions.
A real partnership between government and business, between national and local, between public and private. These 5 missions will be the backbone of our election manifesto and our programme for government.
And if that video explanation doesn't clear up anything for you, visiting the Labour website will make things 100 times worse. It just seems like a lesson in meaningless right-wing slogans. Boris Johnson is somewhere right now very proud that he influenced this type of politics. One thing that is very clear, it is the advantage of Keir Starmer being without a personality, being a blank slate, and being less exciting than drying paint.
Whereby people can project onto him the kind of politics which they see useful at the time in order to support whatever argument it is they are trying to make.
And this observation couldn't be made at Keir Starmer's predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. Not only was Jeremy not liked by the establishment, he was actively hated by the establishment. And there was a moment in time when the right-wing press didn't know what side Keir Starmer was standing on, and even tried to paint him as anti-establishment, despite the fact that he was previously the Director of Public Prosecutions and received the knighthood from King Charles, who was Prince Charles at the time in 2014. But it's safe to say that these print media criticisms were hitting Keir Starmer with fluffy pillows compared to what they did to Jeremy Corbyn.
During my leadership of the party, I suffered more sustained personal abuse than any other leader of any political party has ever suffered.
Something which again was acknowledged by Sir Keir Starmer during the leadership debates.
Well, look, the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn in that election we've just had were terrible, and they came back at us on the door. They vilified him, and they knew what they were doing, and they knew why they were doing it.
Sir Keir would go on to take a note out of the media's book and vilify Jeremy Corbyn himself some time later. But before we do that, let's take another moment to observe Sir Keir Starmer kissing the ring of Jeremy Corbyn.
I want to pay tribute to Jeremy Corbyn, who led our party through some really difficult times, who energised our movement, and who's a friend as well as a colleague.
And this tribute wasn't forgotten when it was time to remind Sir Keir Starmer that he shouldn't say things like, Jeremy Corbyn was never my friend. But more confusing than that attempt at rewriting history was the time that Sir Keir Starmer stood in front of two Union Jacks and gave a speech that resembled he had just recaptured the Labour Party from the BNP or UKIP.
We have changed from a party that looked inward to a party that meets the public gaze, from a party of dogma to a party of patriotism, from a party of protest to a party of public service.
And these efforts to undermine and smear the last Labour leadership allowed other confirmed losers to try and take a pop shot at Jeremy Corbyn.
To Emily Thornberry giving him 0 out of 10 for winning elections.
I regret the comments that some colleagues made who themselves supported the election manifesto.
And I feel so sorry for Jeremy that he still has to be bothered with stuff like this today, even though he is no longer able to stand as a Labour MP. But it should be noted that just because someone worked for the Labour Party or was a Labour Party MP staffer at the last general election doesn't mean that they tried to actually win it.
You know, I'll never forget how the Labour digital team under Corbyn were instructed by him to push out adverts to increase voter registration. And what they did is they rigged the Facebook advert so it only showed on Jeremy Corbyn's phone.
Sometimes you can only laugh at the creativity that people display to do some devilish acts. And there were articles printed back in the year 2020 to suggest that there were people on the right wing of the Labour Party trying to bring down Jeremy Corbyn. This was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to the shopping list of individuals that didn't want to see a Jeremy Corbyn government. It reminds me of that hilarious scene from the Airplane movie. Anyway, there were former Labour MPs now standing as Liberal Democrat candidates, being supported by war criminals / former directors of communication for number 10 Downing Street, ex-Labour MPs who now use their experience to go around and get paid for speaking engagements.
But I spent the whole day absolutely supergluing that label to his head. And I know that sounds mean and nasty, but you know, sometimes it's going to take this kind of action to really expose what is going on. And I don't feel bad about it, and I don't think he can take away that label now.
The publicly owned BBC framed Jeremy Corbyn as a Russian asset. Polly Toynbee, who worked for the supposedly left-wing newspaper The Guardian, had an unhealthy obsession with Jeremy Corbyn. And it should go without saying that all of this propaganda, whether it came from the left, the right, Labour politicians, Lib Dem politicians, privately educated liberal LBC radio hosts, meant that the public would eventually have a certain view of Jeremy Corbyn as well.
I really did not like Mr. Corbyn.
Corbyn let us down. The working man, he let us down.
My dad was a diehard Labour all his life, but Corbyn, this time, my dad says, no, I'm not voting him, went Conservative, first time in his life.
Jeremy Corbyn, didn't think much of him, didn't think he could run the country very well, so I just went for the best option as regards running the country and safety of the country, really.
And let's take a moment to just ponder over the fact that that guy in the beanie believed Boris Johnson was what was best for the country and the safety of the country. It just reminds me of the time when I had a serious case of the Liberals, which meant I had a daily diet of LBC and James O'Brien. I remember hearing a caller from Birmingham who said that he would never vote for Jeremy Corbyn because he believed Jeremy Corbyn was a supporter or a member of the IRA. When he was slightly pushed back as to why he believed this, he said he read it in the newspaper. And on reflection, stories like these remind me of two studies carried out. The first study being The Future of the Public's Health in the 21st Century, which was published in 2002, where it says, quote, "Although the news does not specifically tell us what to think, it plays an important role in identifying what issues we should think about." And I would agree with this statement up until a point. The media definitely tells us what to think about, but it can also tell us what to think if we haven't been trained in critical thinking. And I would say this is the case for most people that consume the mainstream media in the UK. The second study, which was published in 2021, Social Media and Attitude Change. Information booming promote or resist persuasion. This study had a focus on social media platforms like Twitter or TikTok, where they concluded in the positive information overload condition, the attitudes of individuals eventually change in a positive way. In the negative information overload condition, individuals tend to be biased against the group being reported, which is shorthand for saying that a population can be indoctrinated if they are sent a message enough times. And nobody has been able to indoctrinate and hammer home a message harder than Rupert Murdoch and his media empire.
A major part of it was what he did with the Sun. He pulled the political system to the right. Culturally, there was a tabloidization of everything, TV, papers.
And we will definitely return to the fact that nothing in British politics gets done without the okay of Rupert Murdoch. But for the time being, let's get back to the long list of individuals that had it out for Jeremy Corbyn. In addition to those already mentioned, we also need to include wash-up comedians that were known for doing blackface.
So in my mind, and I talk about this in my book, and I talk about that a little bit in the documentary, so the reason in my mind why Jeremy Corbyn can't see that mural of men playing Monopoly on the backs of the world's poor might be anti-Semitic is he just sees rich men playing Monopoly on the backs of the world's poor because he's interested in destroying and fighting against capitalism. Unfortunately, it's very clear to Jews that they all look really Jewish and they're part of a tradition that feels like this is a sort of Nazi caricature of the idea of the rich capitalist Jew.
And I don't want to indulge in any whataboutism, but if you have a history of dressing up in blackface and making these types of racist jokes...
Is a 3-year-old, some people will know this, if you let a 3-year-old dress herself, which I did, she will insist on dressing like an East European prostitute. She was wearing like all pink and her hair was in braids and she put lipstick on, right? So I was with her in that and they clearly thought, well, he's just a gypsy, he's some kind of weird...
It is quite possible that you may not be the best person to call out the actions of a man that was protesting apartheid South Africa. At the same age, you were using racial slurs for the Roma, Gypsy and traveller communities.
And I don't know if you find this at all at your level of fame, but they didn't recognise me, right? They didn't recognise me. The thing is, if you go into a shop like that and, you know, you look like a bit of a pikey, which I sort of do when I've not got a suit on.
Anyway, I guess David Baddiel's central point is that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic and he just doesn't know it. Whereas other people like Rachel Riley believe that Jeremy Corbyn is an outright anti-Semite and knows it. And then there is those individuals that find it appropriate to mention Jeremy Corbyn during a debate on Israel trying to turn Gaza into rubble.
Jeremy Corbyn, who certainly failed in his role as being leader of the Labour Party, giving the Labour Party its worst possible election result since the 1930s. But of course, he also pushed me and my family out of the Labour Party, where I was a member for the last 20 years or so, and he pushed me and my family over to live in Israel.
This was probably one of the more entertaining debates during Israel's military campaign on Gaza and the Palestinian people, because even when they switched cameras away from this shouty McShout face, he could still be heard ranting and raving in the background. Anyway, one small observation I was able to make from his screamings was that he was a Labour member for about 20 years before Jeremy Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, which means that he probably joined the Labour Party right around the time future super war criminal Tony Blair took the mantle. Just to summarise, this man was completely fine with the invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, the Tory party murdering countless people with austerity, but decided to move to Israel and cancel his Labour membership once Jeremy Corbyn became Labour leader. It seems like someone is trying to tell us that they support genocide and colonising without telling us they support genocide and colonising. Regardless of these wide-ranging views, an investigation into the levels of anti-Semitism within the Labour Party was carried out. Jeremy Corbyn did not agree with the investigation's findings, and this reaction was enough for Keir Starmer to finally expel Jeremy Corbyn from the Labour Party for good.
Jeremy Corbyn will not stand for Labour at the next general election as a Labour Party candidate. What I said about the party changing, I meant, and we are not going back, and that is why Jeremy Corbyn will not stand as a Labour candidate at the next general election.
But what does that even mean? What are you not going back to? Offering radical socialist policies, the highest membership for any political party in Europe? Or are you claiming anti-Semitism because it was allowed to apparently thrive under Jeremy Corbyn? It fascinates me that Sky News chose to write that Keir Starmer apologises for anti-Semitism, as if we don't live in a timeline where Jeremy Corbyn did exactly the same thing.
To assume that a Jewish friend or fellow member is wealthy, part of some kind of financial or media conspiracy, or takes a particular position on politics in general, or on Israel and on Palestine in particular, is just wrong.
That actually sounds like a person that knows about unconscious and conscious anti-Semitic tropes. But I apologise for interrupting, and let me give the space to Jeremy Corbyn so he's allowed to apologise in his own words and say what he's trying to do to tackle anti-Semitism within the Labour Party while he was leader.
Jewish people have been at the heart of our party and our movement throughout our history. No one should dismiss the concerns they've expressed about what's been happening in the party that I am proud to lead. Driving anti-Semitism out of the party for good and working with the Jewish community to rebuild trust are vital priorities. I'm sorry for the hurt that's been caused to many Jewish people. We have been too slow in processing disciplinary cases of mostly online anti-Semitic abuse by party members. We're acting to speed this process up. People who hold anti-Semitic views have no place in the Labour Party. Our party must never be a home for such people, and never will be. People who use anti-Semitic poison need to understand you do not do it in my name or the name of my party. You are not our supporters. And anyone who denies that this has surfaced within our party is clearly actually wrong and contributing to the problem.
So if it's clear that Jeremy Corbyn took anti-Semitism seriously, denounced anyone that minimised it, apologised for any hurt caused to any Jewish people, explained that Jewish people were welcome within the Labour Party and wanted to rebuild trust, along with speed up any disciplinary matters, what could be another reason as to why the establishment didn't blast these Jeremy Corbyn statements through the airwaves for everyone to see and listen to?
Many vested interests in Britain didn't want any of this. Many global interests didn't want this. I was individually attacked by significant global leaders. Prime Minister Modi, President Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu. I was attacked by unnamed sources in the senior civil service. Likewise, when senior generals said, again unnamed, we will not allow him to become Prime Minister. I don't know who it was that made those remarks directly to journalists, knowing full well they'd be reported. And when a group of soldiers were undertaking target practice against a photograph of me, I was told I shouldn't worry about it, it was just normal behaviour in the army. Sorry, is it normal behaviour to put the photograph of the leader of the opposition up on a target to be shot at?
Something tells me that if the BBC found footage of the Russian army shooting a picture of the opposition to Vladimir Putin, everybody's head within the news studio would spin off their shoulders. But when it happens in the UK, it's just a bit of horseplay. Also, is it normal for influential people within a supposed ally state to want to stop the election of a particular party? A declassified UK article has the then US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, quoted as saying, "It could be that Mr. Corbyn manages to run the gauntlet and get elected. It's possible. You should know. We won't wait for him to do those things to begin to push back. We will do our level best. It's too risky and too important and too hard once it's already happened."
CIA has always been much more concerned with the left in Britain. And I don't think that's just the case in Britain. I think that's around the world because during the Cold War, there was fear that different countries were going to go communist, but also they what's called anti-Americanism, but anti-American imperialism doesn't really exist on the right.
And it could be argued there was no bigger anti-American imperialist than Jeremy Corbyn. Nobody that showed love and solidarity for the most marginalised people across the planet. Whether that be Palestinians at the mercy of Israeli occupation or refugees just trying to find a better way of life.
We're here today to stand up for desperate people who have sought to come to this country as a place of safety, and they've chosen to come by small boats. None of us in this square would willingly get into one of those boats and risk all.
Yeah. There's no one with his record. There's people with good domestic records and stuff, but there was no one with his history of international solidarity, anti-imperialism, pro-Palestine. He was literally ticked every box for being a threat to the British establishment and the unjust system.
And it's not like the mainstream media wasn't actually told about the great work Jeremy Corbyn was involved with.
Wow, you know who's got an impeccable record on anti-racism is Jeremy Corbyn.
But as time went by, these voices got more and more quiet. When it was clear the establishment was trying to anoint someone else as Labour leader, even some of Jeremy's most closest allies decided to turn their back on him. However, this didn't stop lifelong allies like Diane Abbott from defending Jeremy every opportunity she got. And with everybody turning their backs on Jeremy, this led the people that even got engaged with politics because of Jeremy Corbyn to turn their backs as well. This led to people being even more deeper and thoroughly disillusioned with the power of politics because it was put on full display that the one person you actually trusted got thoroughly chewed up and spat out by the system.
Well, I mean, in a way, he also directed people into believing that something could happen through the political system. He basically testified to the redeemability of the political system for some type of social change. It didn't exist.
And how does this relate to Sir Keir Starmer? How has this same system treated a very complicated man by anyone's standards? A man that professes to be a socialist but accepted a knighthood. A man that specialised in human rights law but then went on to be the director of public prosecutions. A man that immediately walked into Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet upon being elected as a MP for the first time, and could be accused of advocating for the policy that put the final nail in the coffin of Corbynism at the 2019 general election.
I'm really pleased that whatever outcome the next Prime Minister puts before us, whether that's a deal of some sort or no deal, we've agreed that it must be subject to another referendum. And in that referendum, Remain must be an option, and Labour will be campaigning for Remain. That's a really important point of principle. I'm equally pleased that we've reached consensus on this. The trade unions are behind it, the shadow cabinet's behind it, and I know it's what our members want. Right, the Parliament has the first say, but if we need to break the impasse, our options must include campaigning for a public vote, and nobody is ruling out Remain as an option.
And this is a guy that served for 3 years as Jeremy Corbyn's shadow Brexit secretary. He was kind of integral, maybe even the key player in the second referendum position, which I think, and many other people think, cost Labour the 2019 election.
A position Keir Starmer immediately dropped soon as he was elected Labour leader. And with Keir Starmer willing to distance the United Kingdom away from the European Union, how comes business leaders are still willing to cozy up to the man? How comes business leaders don't feel threatened by a man that admittedly called himself a socialist in the past?
Sit here feeling a bit excited. And it's a feeling I haven't felt for a long time in business. What I felt for a long time is in absolute limbo land. And I do recognise that you must have been having a huge amount of conversations. And I certainly read the background document because it touched on all of the points that I hear all of the time. When I talked to a lot of big business, you know, where are we going? What's our framework? How are you going to enable us? How are we going to be partners? But I obviously also talk to an awful lot of small businesses, and they have a slightly different rhetoric. They also want to see vision, but they want to be included. They want to be supported.
A socialist that is more comfortable with helping the owners of big and small business. A man that has described himself as a supporter of trade unions is doing everything in his power to make the owners happy as opposed to the workers. Now, it is possible that Keir Starmer has changed his mind on a couple of things since becoming Labour leader. It is possible that some of his policy positions have drifted to the right since he published those pledges while running to become Labour leader. It is possible that he has updated his learning on certain things since he spoke directly to the Labour membership. And there could be another reason why Sir Keir Starmer has done a complete 180 on most things he has said in the past.
Keir Starmer is the most untrustworthy politician in Britain today.
And I will definitely delve into the policy U-turns in a later video. But let's take a little look at some of the things Sir Keir Starmer has done since taking up the role of Labour leader, which I would suggest really speaks to the character of this person. While attending an LBC interview, Sir Keir Starmer seemed to suggest that Israel had every right to perform war crimes on the Palestinians within the Gaza Strip.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water? Sir Keir?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself.
By performing war crimes, apparently. But things just get worse for Keir after this interview, where he goes on to gaslight every single person that heard his words very clearly.
So let me be clear about what I was saying and what I wasn't saying. I was saying Israel had the right to self-defense, and when I said that right, it was that right to self-defense. I was not saying that Israel had the right to cut off water, food, fuel or medicines.
And if this was any other video, this would be the exact moment I insert the clip where Keir Starmer says that Israel is allowed to commit war crimes. But I will rise above that urge to do that when you have the power to rewind. But what I will focus on is the fact that he didn't even say I was wrong. He just blatantly said he did not say those words. And I would again suggest that you rewind so you can hear him say those words himself. But what's worse than Keir Starmer saying that he didn't actually say the words that he actually said was the fact that his closest allies were out batting for him as well.
The Geneva Conventions. He says the imposition of sieges which endangers the lives of civilians is prohibited under international humanitarian law. Keir Starmer says Israel has a right to impose a siege.
I don't...
Who is right?
Keir Starmer has said right from the beginning that any war, it's important that democracies uphold the rules-based order and that must be within international law.
And I'm
said
simply
that from the
asking you.
beginning.
Yeah.
In defence of Keir, firstly, he's acknowledged that people have interpreted his words as justifying those tactics, which that was not his intention at all. I've been in interviews with you and your colleagues before where you have a sustained line of questioning. There are lots of things that are whirring through your mind. You want to make sure you get it right. I think Keir was answering a previous question, not that direct question.
So there you have it. In case you are wondering, you misinterpreted when you heard Sir Keir Starmer say Israel had the right to...
A siege is appropriate. Cutting off power, cutting off water.
You should have known, as the listener and viewer, that Keir Starmer was trying to say Israel should not cut off electricity, water, or do a siege, and should do everything within international law. Sometimes it really feels like that we keep seeing Sir Keir Starmer slip on a banana peel that was placed there personally by Sir Keir Starmer. Jesus, I've never seen a person get more in their own way. And when he's not gaslighting people, he is directly telling them that he is willing to break pledges. And after watching an unholy amount of videos featuring Sir Keir Starmer, I've come to the conclusion that he has a couple of tells when he is lying or he's about to lie. The first tell is that he's actually moving his lips. The second tell is a bit more subtle. He displays this very confused face, like a turtle that just found out a fart comes out of their bottom. Just look at this photo from a video recording of Question Time back when Sir Keir Starmer was sitting in the shadow cabinet, where Sir Keir Starmer is rightfully pulled up on the fact that he never supported Jeremy Corbyn's bid to become Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Jeremy Corbyn has been saying, I know you didn't support Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership. That's for your work at the CBS.
And the reason this is such a significant clip is because Sir Keir Starmer goes on to admit just as much in his interview with Nick Ferrari.
Let's just run through it. I didn't vote for him in 2015 when he stood as leader. I wanted him to stand down in 2016. He won again. I again didn't vote for him.
So it would seem that Sir Keir Starmer loves to do the theatrics whenever he's caught in a lie. I understand what you must be thinking. He was publicly called out and he had to save face. But he could have just saved face by not reacting at all. But he had to do this stupid little turtle farting face just for him to so boldly and casually admit those were the facts years later, now that he is Labour leader. This frustrates me because Keir Starmer either believes that nothing he has ever said or done was ever recorded, or he believes that we all share the same memory capacity as goldfish. A man who, despite having a massive tail, is so comfortable with lying in the moment and then admitting it years later, or speaks his mind in the moment, then days later lies about what he actually said, should be a danger in anybody's books, especially when he's so comfortable with saying that he wasn't the friend of a man whose shadow cabinet he sat within, coupled with the fact that he was praising him and decided to steal all of his best policies when he was running for leadership of the Labour Party.
Oh, I haven't spoken to Jeremy Corbyn for 2.5 years now. So
is he a friend? Was he a friend?
No, I mean, as I say, I haven't spoken to him for 2.5 years.
Such a weird thing to say on national radio when we actually have video evidence of you saying the exact opposite. Before, I was one of those naive people that believed that Sir Keir Starmer had to sort of distance himself from Jeremy Corbyn because of how much the mainstream media hated him, and he was just doing it so he could get into power so then he can enact much of the Jeremy Corbyn policies. But more of the videos I started to see, I began to realise maybe Sir Keir Starmer always hated Jeremy Corbyn and everything he stood for. Don't get me wrong, you can hate someone and still share their policies, and we will definitely be looking at some of the policies Sir Keir Starmer hopes to enact if he is to become UK Prime Minister. But there is definitely something to be said about a man that can so easily on his former leader in public.
You've got to choose who you'd rather sit next to, Piers Morgan or Jeremy Corbyn.
Piers Morgan.
Wow, that is super funny. Sir Keir Starmer would rather sit next to Piers Morgan than Jeremy Corbyn at a Arsenal football game, leaving out the fact that no one should be really going to see Arsenal play football anymore. Sir Keir Starmer would rather sit next to a man whose obsession led him to wage a misogynistic and racist campaign against Meghan Markle than a man that wanted to renationalise the railways. Sir Keir Starmer would rather sit next to a man who published fake photos on the cover of a national newspaper than a man that was at the forefront of protesting the illegal invasion of Iraq. I think even Sir Keir Starmer himself would say that he's working on demon time. For a person that has been caught to regularly lie, twist the truth, misrepresent the past, gaslight people and regularly change his mind on certain opinions, It does make you wonder why we ever found him boring in the first place. Don't get me wrong, I don't feel he has any personality, and I find him less inspiring than wet paint. However, there is something oddly exciting about a man that lies more regularly than Tony Soprano.
I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. And on behalf of the Labour Party, I'd like to wish you a happy new year.
Okay, I don't believe you can accuse him of being boring in that clip. Psychotic, without a personality, deer caught in the headlights, or a man that will wear your skin tonight. However, the mainstream media has continued to push this narrative about Keir Starmer being boring, because I believe at this point everybody in the mainstream media is sick of the Tories being in power. So they want someone else to take over, but they didn't want it to be Jeremy Corbyn because he would have redistributed too much. So they have, behind closed doors, anointed Sir Keir Starmer. But because they don't want the public to think they are giving him a free ride, they have to pull him up on something. And the only thing they could think of was that he could be considered boring.
Do you think people actually want their politicians to be a little bit boring?
Look, the only thing boring is being in opposition.
No, I know you've rehearsed that, but I'm just asking you a straight question. Do people want their politicians to be boring?
A steady political force. Few of the theatrical flourishes of past winners.
Members of the public think you are boring, bland and dull.
And I could be wrong, but the strong accusations that he is boring and without a personality has led Sir Keir Starmer to give speeches like these.
Houses that get burgled countless times, yet the police never come. Hospitals, if you can believe it, putting out messages, begging patients to stay away from A&E. Children going to school hungry. And it's not just the poorest who are struggling.
10 out of 10 occasions, I would much prefer a boring individual with actual policies than this cringeworthy Tony Blair tribute act trying to actually speak to the anxieties that people hold in this country. Instead of describing what is actually happening for people, what are you actually going to do to address those problems? Or maybe I'm asking for too much. Why question it and just fall victim to the same tactics and rhetoric style of Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage? But whatever the case, you cannot take away this simple fact that one time, in my opinion, where Sir Keir Starmer was very exciting was when he was saying and doing nothing while a pub landlord was blowing a gasket because he wanted Sir Keir Starmer to leave his establishment.
Landlord, here's the landlord. That man is not allowed in my pub. No, Lord. I'm not going to physically hurt him. That man... Oi! That's assault. I am not bothering you. I am not bothering him. That man is not allowed in my pub. Get out of my pub. Go on. Calm yourself down. Get out of my pub. Sorry, can you keep out of the way? Thank you.
Now, I'm never going to say that I agree with how that pub landlord acted, but it's a private establishment. And if he doesn't want Sir Keir Starmer there, he has every right as being part owner. And it should be noted that this pub landlord's biggest grievance with Sir Keir Starmer was that he agreed with the government's policy on COVID measures. The pub landlord said that they were too harsh. In my opinion, they weren't harsh enough. But we don't need to reheat old COVID-19 pandemic grievances. But I do have to say that I'm very concerned with how much Sir Keir Starmer openly admits that he is friends with Tories.
I'm on very good terms with many, many Tory MPs. I'm not ashamed about it. And I've got very good friends who are Tories, and they've been very, very good friends of mine for a very, very long time, and long may that last.
Again, I have to ask, why are you very good friends with Tories when in 2015 you openly said, I am a socialist? Fast forward to today, and he is saying that Jeremy Corbyn was never his friend, but he has been long-time friends with Tories. Most socialists I know would willingly break their fist against a brick wall, then openly admit that they are very good friends with Tories. In addition to that, they would also be very hesitant to be caught in public begging a Tory to see where they have common ground.
Does the Prime Minister agree with me that whatever differences we may have, no matter what difficulties we face as a country, we in this House have a duty to stand on the shoulders of giants who came before us and support Ukraine's fight for freedom, liberty and victory?
And despite what Keir tells us on radio shows and when he's in Parliament, he is also telling us that he wants to be just like the Tories through his interviews and engagement with journalists.
What I'm saying, and I think most people watching this, looking at the chaos of the country, the damage that we've done, is that we'll go into that election ensuring that every single commitment that we make is fully costed,
I think what
and every commitment can be kept.
When he's not telling us that he's happy to be branded a fiscal conservative, he is ruling out universal childcare for young children, which will definitely pay for itself through parents being able to return to work and contribute into the tax returns. How about the fact he refused to commit to a public sector pay rise just to keep up with Rishi Sunak being a cold-hearted individual? But somehow he is able to promise to steel workers in South Wales that their jobs will still be around in the future. And I will leave you to decide whether he will keep his promise on this particular vow. But it is always interesting to find out what Keir Starmer believes about taxes this week.
We've got the highest tax burden that we've had for decades in this country under this government, and you know, doesn't that say it all? You've got a high tax economy and a low growth economy.
So would
we
you
want to
cut it?
turn that around. I do want to bring taxes down, but before I go to taxes, I know that the key here is growth. Because if we can get growth, sustained growth across the country, then that is the single best way to provide the revenue that we desperately need for our public services, for our high streets, and raising living standards.
I will let someone in the comments actually describe what he means by growth, but I do understand what he means by bringing down taxes. He wants the rich to keep more of their money and illustrate to the general public that he will be very fiscally responsible with the tax revenue he does get. However, it would seem that this desire to be seen as someone that can be trusted with the public purse is something new to Keir Starmer.
And they showed, as you say, that this is the guy who likes living it up, essentially. And it wasn't a surprise that they tried to keep these documents suppressed, because what it showed, I mean, the kind of headline of it was he spent £160,000 on a chauffeur-driven car. For the first 2 years he was at CPS.
Regardless of how you describe Sir Keir Starmer's proclivity to splash the cash on himself, it has to be said the way he does his messaging and branding is very Tory-esque.
5 national missions to bring purpose and pride back to Britain. Each of the missions is built on sound foundations: economic stability, strong national security, and secure borders.
And these missions that don't seem to be attached to any type of meaningful policies is making everybody ask the question, what the hell is Labour playing at?
Well, the question is, why are you employing Tory policies to deal with a Tory crisis?
I think that he will probably be not much worse than the Sunak government domestically, but on foreign policy, it's possible that he could be actually worse than the Tories.
And this prediction may well come true, with Keir cozying up with the cesspit which is the Sun, coupled with the fact he isn't experiencing any pushback from supposedly left-wing outlets like The Guardian, except to give him some helpful tips once he is able to form a government. What else are we supposed to conclude from what would be Labour's first government since 2010? But I guess that all remains to be seen. But what I do know at the time of actually recording this video is that the Labour Party under Sir Keir Starmer has become a safe haven for disgruntled Tory MPs, with shocking voting records in the House of Commons and a viable voting option for lifelong Tories.
I am what is commonly known as a disillusioned, disaffected Tory. I really thought Boris was going to be the man, and I was so disappointed.
What do you want us to take away from here? Say, right, that's the sort of thing that really matters to you.
The Labour Party appears to have their finger on what I want. You, in person, seem to be the right guy for the job.
I appreciate that, Ken.
I will vote Labour.
And with Labour continuing to win by-elections against the Tories, something tells me that Sir Keir Starmer isn't going to change his approach to not committing to any promises, parroting Tory spending cuts, or even suggest he still harbours some socialist principles. So that's the end of the video. If you've made it to this point, I cannot put into words how grateful I am. Please feel free to provide me with any feedback in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. If you are new to the channel, please don't forget to subscribe. I got more videos on the way. And if you're feeling extra generous, please feel free to check out my Patreon account. I will be back soon with another video in my Starmerism series. Until that time, ciao!